May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Today we began our service with the Great Litany, a very long prayer. During this Lenten season, in which I doubt this church has plans for an educational program, and I know the church that I am connected with officially doesn't have any plans, I would suggest that those of you who printed out the bulletin keep that Great Litany, and that each day you read a portion of it and ponder and think about it. Think about what it says. Think about how we individually, as a society, as a church, fail and are in need of God's forgiveness. Think about how we can better fulfill those prayers in the future. Sometimes in our busyness, in our effort to move beyond, we slight things that call us to ponder. And yet, in this time when we are separated, we have more time, whether it's simply the saving of commuter time, to do just that, to reflect, to think, to search our minds and our hearts, to wonder, and to see where you, where I, where we can do better, can be more Christ-like in the world. How we can prepare for the time that is to come when we will be able to gather together once again as God's people in community in person. But we need to remember also that we are, even now, as we are physically separated, living in community. You and I remain members of God's community, the church. As I was reflecting on today's readings, what kept coming back to my mind over and over again is the difference between covenant and contract. And I think we do well, again this Lent, to ponder the difference and to really seek clarity. For you and I live in a world of contracts. Indeed, at one point in my life, I used to negotiate contracts for teachers' unions. Contracts are an agreement between two parties where each party says they will do certain things and the other party says they will do certain things. With a contract, if one party fails, the contract is broken and no one is bound by it. Sadly, way too much of our life today is lived contractually. We call marriage a covenant, but in most cases, it is a contract. In most cases, the agreement is, I will love and care for you as long as you do these things, and I'll do these things. And if one of us grows or changes or fails, we can move beyond, establish a new contract with someone else. Indeed, many of our friendships are based on contracts. I'll be your friend as long as you help me in my business. I'll be your friend as long as you agree with me politically. I'll be your friend as long as you, whatever it may be. But if you fail to meet my expectations, then our friendship is broken. We live in a world where almost everything in our world is seen as a contractual transaction. I'll do certain things provided you do certain things. But God does not call us to contracts. God calls us to covenants. And indeed, the only salvation we can hope for is that God remains true to God's covenant with us. You see, in a covenant, both parties stipulate they will do certain things. Both parties agree on certain things that they will perform and do for one another. But in a covenant, if one party breaks that covenant, the other is still bound by it. God chose to establish covenants with us. God, when we sin, remains bound to continue to love and care for us and to seek the good for us. Covenants last. Covenants are what allows one party to fail or to change and ask forgiveness of the other. Covenants allow parties to reflect on where they have gone astray, where they have made mistakes, and to then make plans for renewal and continued growth together. Sadly, even in the church, all too many times we see our belonging to a community as a contract rather than a covenant. We are drawn to a particular minister or to a particular group of people. And so long as those people are in place, we're with that group. But if any of that changes, we feel free to leave, to find someplace new, more to our pleasing. But that is not what God calls Christian community to. The Christian life is a life of covenant, a life of even when I am frustrated or disappointed, or even when I am in a dry period and I'm questioning my faith, I continue to come. I continue to be held by those who worship and care with me. I continue to be supported and be a part of that community so that together we move forward, always perfecting our community, always making deeper our commitments to one another and to God. Indeed, our commitments to one another are because and through our commitment to God. God is the center. God is the rock. God is our salvation. Salvation from ourselves, salvation from our self-centeredness, salvation from our seeking only our own good. This past week, with the horrible situation in Texas, I think we see in a political way that difference between covenant and contract. Texas, feeling that it could be better served on its own, sought a contract separate from the energy grid of the United States. And so in the United States, there's a Western grid, an Eastern grid, and a Texas grid. Texas contracted with providers. The providers would make money, and the recipients would receive their energy. But the unexpected, although predicted, happened, and that contract failed. And energy is not being provided or was not provided. But you see, there are others in our nation that said, in spite of that, we have a covenant. We are a United States. And so we need to send aid to this hurting part of us, because it is part of us, no matter what contract they may have entered into. We have a covenant with them. And I would say, if you are concerned and desire to give aid to the Texans that are hurting so badly, Episcopal Relief and Development erd.org, will be happy to receive your money. You see, in a contract, the good of people is secondary. Community is secondary. In a covenant, community and the good of every person is the central cause, the central reason for entering into covenant. And so, because God chooses to enter into covenant with you and me, we live in hope of our own redemption, the redemption of the world, and we have the power to actually seek to act as Christ would act in this broken world of ours. Amen.